You are now listening to the Going Deep podcast with your hosts, Kevin Massari and Mike Bunt, live from the Cover One Sports Network. Here we go.
Welcome into another edition of the Going Deep podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Massari, here with Mike Bunt. We're going to go through our 53-man roster projection. As I've said all month, this is one of our favorite shows, as Mike and I will have probably very similar, but still yet many people to discuss. We'll talk about what we saw from the preseason game to wrap this thing up. And then also we're excited for next week's show to go over Cut Down Day special next Tuesday, 1 week away from Cut Down Day, Mike. How you feeling about the preseason so far?
I was feeling a little bit better before last Saturday, but I'm still not that down about the performance on Saturday. Just a preseason game, not something to get all worked up about. But excited for this show, Kevin. This is always one of our funnest shows of the year, and there's going to be a lot of things happening between now and the next few weeks before the start of the regular season. So can't wait to get this started. And then we also have some big news about a new addition to our Going Deep podcast team that we'll announce at some point during the show tonight.
Yeah, I'm getting pretty excited for stuff, Mike. It's 1 week away from my favorite day of the year. There's going to be 1,200 free agents on the market. Lots to discuss there next week. Will there be a mini trade frenzy in 6 to 7 days? That could happen too. We were talking about that a little bit earlier today, so there is much to still be discussed across the entire roster, and it's going to be really fun. And we do want to shout out to our new producer, Kevin Syracuse, coming over from Buffalo Fanatic. We're excited to have him taking over for old producer AJ. So we'll have Kevin up and at it here, working behind the scenes, but we'll see him as early as next week here on the show. So we're pretty excited for that news. So a special shout out to Kevin, and excited to see his written work throughout the Cover One Sports Network. But Mike, long show. We got stuff to talk about. Don't need to beat around the bush. We're going to kick this thing off, and then we're going to probably put out graphics later. You guys can vote on who you think's has a better roster projection, Mike or myself. Will Mike get a Bobby Hart this year or not? We'll have to see if he can hit one of these sleepers in this year's 53-man projection. We only do this once. I'm not going to edit it. I'm not going to change it 24 hours before. I'm not going to alter it. These are who I believe will make the roster. And same thing with Mike. Mike, we're going to start right at the top with quarterback. There could be some interesting discussion here. Would have been a little bit more interesting probably last week. We might have had some differences and been able to talk about this position a little bit more. But bouncing it over to you, Mike, let's start with you. And how many quarterbacks and who do you have making the roster at the end of the day a week from today?
Yeah, this is a pretty easy one. This is going to be two quarterbacks. It's going to be the Allens, Josh and Kyle, with Matt Barkley most likely being a practice squad addition. A week ago, people wanted to see Barkley with an opportunity with the twos. We saw that last Saturday. Now we understand why he's a practice squad quarterback at this point of his career. I think this one is pretty cut and dry unless there's some surprise quarterback that gets cut that seemingly wants to come to Buffalo to back up Josh. That's better than what Kyle Allen is.
Yeah, all we can do is project for today. And I do believe there is a scenario you could see that. I do believe there is a situation where a quarterback could come in and maybe earn themselves a job. Will they start on the practice squad? We have that elbow injury from Matt Barkley. It's said to be minor at this stage. Will that be enough to even roster him still? Will he be on IR? It's just like some player coach. There's much that could happen there with Matt Barkley. And will someone come in to compete, at least to the practice squad to start with, pressing Kyle Allen? It's very possible. I don't think it's crazy to assume the Bills will be out there looking at the quarterback market. But yeah, it's all but sealed. It's Allen and Allen at this stage going forward. But I don't know that that's for sure locked. It is a position I'm looking at least a little bit in 1 week from today to see cuts around the league, to see if the Bills are minorly interested. If there's a low-end trade target that they think would be an upgrade, they can stick some salary with the team. It's still an interesting position to monitor, as backup quarterback at one point this offseason was the talk of the town. So we'll see how that plays out. Right now, Mike and I agree with the quarterback room, but I'm not overly optimistic at that unit, but I do believe that something is added. I think I'm not crazy to the practice squad, the Bills will go outside of the organization to add their. So on my practice squad 16, I do have one quarterback spot, Matt Barkley versus the entire cut field. So we'll see as that develops in a week from today. But Mike, we're gonna move on to the running back room. And this one, could this get interesting? I'm not sure. I'm gonna bounce it to Mike to see what he's got going on in his running back room.
So right now I have 3 running backs. I have the 3 that you would expect: James Cook, Damian Harris, Latavius Murray. Jordan Mims has been impressive in the preseason so far, so I think he's going to be a squad addition for this team. What's really interesting is Ty Johnson signing with the Bills today. Now, what is Ty Johnson's role going to be? It's a little bit late to expect him to be part of the roster early on in the season, but we're talking about a guy that has played in the NFL and has had some success to a certain degree. Not a star or anything like that, but a guy that has produced at the NFL level. So could he be a surprise 4th running back on this roster? I think it's possible, but I'm not going to include that in my roster projection today. I'm going to leave both of them on the outside, although I am curious if that was just a move for this preseason game on Saturday, just get through that game, or if that's a move with longer term implications for the rest of the season.
Who do you have? Do you just have names going through to the practice squad, or what do you see happening behind those 3?
Well, I'm more guessing when it comes to practice squad, but for my practice squad, I had Johnson and Mims on the practice squad.
You have Johnson and Mims on the practice squad. Okay, that makes sense. So if you look for me, I think that Johnson's an interesting add. They're waiting for him to rehab from that pectoral injury. He's been relatively healthy in his career. His advanced metrics are pretty good. If you go by PFF score, that's pretty good. I've been told that he's a really good pass blocker. He sticks in there and makes pass and is really good at protecting his quarterback, has an elite RAS. So there's definitely some, he's not tiny, he's a medium-sized back with speed. So that's an interesting play at this point. I do believe it's more of a reflection that it's probably Darrington Evans just didn't take over the job. Ty Johnson returned a few kicks in his career. He does maybe 5 kicks per year, roughly on average. So he isn't foreign to him. I do think they brought him in to get him into the acclimation to the system now. I do think he goes right to the practice squad. I think that there's plans for him. I don't think they signed him now. He's, got a little bit of interesting past. He's played in this league. He's been good for the Jets. So I do believe that he's going right to the practice squad as good depth. With Mims, I have those 2 on the practice squad as well. But for right now, Mike and I take another pass. We take a push. I have the same 3 running backs making the roster at this stage. But still another room the Bills could be sneaking around at, though. I'm not convinced that they won't make another. They've had 4 running backs. Usually it's Tywan Jones or somebody else. But they have had moments where they do roster 4. Yes, one would be inactive. But for now, I think it's Ty Johnson. He's going to the practice squad. And if he shows that he can do what they need him to do, I would not be shocked by a couple elevations. And then if that works out, a full promotion to the roster. So he is probably going to take that. But I've liked what I've seen from Mims so far. Not quite on Blackshear's level as last year, but Mims has shocked, surprised. And I would not be shocked to see an elevation from him at some point somewhere along the way this season with some of the 2 practice elevations that they get. And 16 practice squad players, they can keep as many as 6 veterans of any stature because of COVID, the COVID rules on the roster with no year service limitations. Mims wouldn't be one of them. He'd be a UDFA. Ty Johnson would qualify into someone that has over 2 years of accumulated service, Mike. So we keep it going. And we're going to go to, probably a little bit more fun of a unit, and we're going to stick it to receiver for now. We're going to get it going. We're going to get started early. Will there be any Going Deep podcast drama? I'm not sure Mike and I will have a difference here yet, but we'll have to see what his projections are and maybe tosses some names they'd like to see make it through waivers.
Yeah, so this is the first position where I thought maybe we could have some disagreement, this or tight end. I know we've had some talks about privately over the last couple of weeks. I'm still sticking with the 6 that I thought going into training camp and going into the preseason. Obviously, Diggs, Davis, then Sherfield now I believe has shown that he's probably your number 3 wide receiver on the squad based on what he did in training camp, which was a surprise to me. I never expected him to be that high on this depth chart, but he's earned it with the way he's played so far. I'd put Hardy 4, Shakir 5, and then Justin Shorter 6 after the strong performance. And I never really thought Shorter was in any jeopardy to begin with, but the whole conversation would be, is there a spot for Andy Isabella to make it? Now, heading into camp, heading into the first couple preseason games, I would have said no chance that Andy Isabella could have made this team. But he looked solid against the Colts. It's clear that the coaching staff wanted to give him an opportunity on special teams this week to show if he could add value in that scenario. I think he did enough to catch their eye in a manner where even if he doesn't make this roster, they want to keep him on this practice squad as someone that they could call up in case of an injury or activate him to the roster if there is someone that has to miss time due to injury concerns or anything like that. But I don't think he's done enough to actually make this roster. There's a lot of tough decisions near the bottom, and I just don't think keeping 7 wide receivers is really the best use of your resources at this time when you do have other positions that are going to be more important, that are going to make more of an impact. I will say this. He got second team gunner reps during the preseason game against Pittsburgh. As Joe Marino pointed out, he had he had a good rep against the Steelers on Saturday doing exactly that. But with some of the guys ahead of him, I don't think he's going to jump to make the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a little bit more an interesting late push for Shorter to make sure his position is secured on the roster. I do think he did enough. I do think he showed that big body frame in the red zone. I do think it'd be interesting to see him active on game days in his gunner reps as well. I was getting gunner 1 reps. So I think that's a pretty locky style of game he had of all the, we talk about, the first quarter was not ideal. The rest of the game was fine, Mike. The rest of the game was about what you're looking for. The first quarter was mashed with penalties. It was mashed with calls they shouldn't have made, putting in the Bills in, 2nd and 30, 3rd and 39. I mean, just situations where you're going to run up the middle. Like, you're losing valuable reps. I wouldn't have liked to see them make some of those calls early on in that game, especially. And then you have, a receiver from the Steelers blocking into the end zone, then turning around to catch the ball. Textbook offensive pass interference, not called. Doesn't really matter for the score purposes, but it does matter for critical and vital reps. You're not looking to have those guys do up downs, go back to the bench, get up, go down, get up, get down. It's similar to like a starting pitcher or relief pitcher in baseball. There is something to that. So they were definitely not going to push the reps that I think that the refs stole from the Bills in that game. Nonetheless, the receiver position is agreed upon by me. I do agree with Mike's 6 selections there. I thought that was steady since OTAs. That's who I've actually have no movement. I almost made a move to my lineup, to my receiver lineup at one point this offseason, just as recently as a week or two ago. But actually, I had no move since the spring to my receiver unit. I think that's the 6 that they're going to bring in. I do believe Andy Isabella is going to be to the practice squad. I do think that that's fairly locky to send him to the practice squad. So behind that, though, I think, they're probably going to keep a younger player. I think they'll have 2. Will it be like
I think Tyrell
Johnson?
I think Shavers has a good chance of being on the practice squad. I know he had the few drops in the Colts preseason game, but he also showed a little bit. He had a nice touchdown grab, obviously wide open. It was a great play call. I mean, and then he had the pass interference committed against him when he was breaking deep. So I think Shavers is intriguing because we've heard a lot about him being a talented gunner as well. And then his height and some of what he could bring to the table. Not that he would ever really make an impact in games, but I do think he has some developmental attributes that are intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the route they'll go. Would I prefer them go the route of like a Patman, Keyshawn Johnson, who's been getting a lot of special teams reps per his special teams counts? I'd be a little bit more interested in that route, but I get it. I'm not going to fight too much about the practice squad receiver. I do think it's probably Isabella and Shavers at this stage, but wouldn't be shocked if one of those bigger, taller guys that had played pretty well throughout this 8-man or Patman are a third receiver added to this. But for right now, in my 16-man projection, I just have the 2 receivers going through to the practice squad. One of your vets being used on Andy Isabella and a standard UDFA and Tyrell Shavers. Mike, so we're going to go to the fun part. We're going to go to tight end now. We don't have any disagreements yet. It's disappointing. I'm disappointed in myself. But after the fair nature of those 11 players we both selected, I don't know where the difference would have came unless one of us was really adamant on a free agent quarterback, which wouldn't have been a terrible thing because I think that's still possible. But we both have the same 11 to this point, and we're going to tight end, and we'll probably have almost very similar here. But Mike, let's hear your tight ends. We're going to assume for purposes of this discussion that Gilliam is in the tight end room. I do think that that's generally, at least this year, where the majority, at least over 50% of his snaps might come from.
So this is where we might have a disagreement at the tight end position. We'll, like you said, count Gilliam as a tight end for this show. And this must be disappointing for you so far that we've been on the same page, because I know you value yourself as the sane, rational one of the person of the show, while I'm the out there crazy one. So the fact that we're on the same page has to be a tough pill to swallow early on. But I will say with the tight end room, we obviously know Dawson Knox, Kincaid are locks. And then the question is, what about the guys behind? They brought in some intriguing prospects this year with Wilson and Sternberger. Some people were wondering if they could push for one of the lower end depth spots at tight end. I have both Gilliam and Quinton Morris making this roster. I know Morris is probably one of those last guys on to make this team, in my opinion, but I believe he will make it because of the fact that they're going to be running more 12 personnel this year. They need backups in case anything happens. I know we've been saying a lot in the offseason, if there's an injury to Kincaid or if there's an injury to Knox, that could change up their entire scheme and how they attack opposing defenses. But I do think that they need depth just in case. I know Morris isn't a high-end player, but he's now entering his 3rd year with this organization, came in as a UDFA. They spent a year developing him. They kept him last year over O.J. Howard. I believe they think he has attributes that you can work with that provide quality depth. I know he didn't play on special teams on Saturday against the Steelers, but without Knox in that game, they needed him to play more time with the ones. I think that might have been as much of a reason as it was just to test out other players and special teams to see what some other guys could potentially provide that are fighting for spots on this roster. But at this point, I think with what he brings from a depth and a special teams manner, he will likely be on this roster. I would say 85% shot at this point, just because he is someone that does contribute on special teams. He's not someone that is strictly a tight end. So while I'm intrigued by Sternberger and Wilson, and could there be another blocking style tight end that could add to this roster after cutdown day? Definitely. But going into cutdown day, I think he's part of this team.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at this unit as a redundancy with what some issues that the team had last year and why they couldn't run 12 personnel. Yes, O.J. Howard was a flop. Everyone just kind of ends it there in discussions, and that's true. I mean, he came in, he actually made decent money, enough money to where you would have thought he would have been part of not only just being in on certain packages, but was making enough money to contribute, to actually be a part of this offense. Came in, just didn't really have a very good preseason at all, not even making the original roster. Was challenging to the Bills. They didn't go out and weren't able to find a suitable replacement for him last year, including Quinton Morris. I think he's an okay receiving tight end. He comes from my heralded MAC. The Bills could roster 2 tight ends again from the MAC. That they like the grit, they like the special teams ability. The entire starters played this week against the Steelers, but Quinton Morris didn't see any special team snaps. You had snaps from Neal, you had snaps from Shorter, you had snaps from all of the special teamer ones. Quinton Morris didn't have any. So it wasn't a situation of resting your players. He got exposed on a naked boot, 2 weeks ago. Also got beat again with Josh. I don't know how willing they are to roster him. If they do roster Quentin Morris, it's because they want him short term, or they want to get him through to the practice squad. In my opinion, his contract still has no dead money. It's written very much in terms of a practice squad contract. I don't know how big his mark. I know for some reason he actually has a good standing in Buffalo in terms of Bills fans. But I don't think he'd get claimed with his 60 receiving yards. I'm not overly concerned at all. And if he does, I don't know how upset I am that now you have Joe Wilson on the practice squad instead. But anyways, I don't have him making the roster. I have Sternberger on the roster today. I think he presents the team a little bit more of everything. I don't know, even if either or makes the roster, I think that there is still a chance they go out and claim someone at that position specifically, and or could make a move, and wouldn't be shocked to roster 3 tight ends. Honestly, if Gilliam is on the roster, which he should be, would not be shocked to see just 3 for now and have tight ends on the practice squad either. Maybe. So it's not that I'm necessarily, I liked what I've seen from Sternberger. I think that he does a specific thing well, but maybe neither of them make it. I do have him just due to the 12 personnel that they're going to run. I do have Sternberger on the roster right now, but I think either one is very, very, very fringe and would get cut at the first sign. Or if the Bills need to go in the bag of tricks to save a roster spot, they could try to push both of these guys through to the practice squad, and that's where I'm going to put Morris for now. He's going to my practice squad as a priority practice squad member.
And I wouldn't be against that. It's not like I'm sold that you need to have Morris on this Bills roster. I'm just not there with Sternberger yet. The fact he's playing late into these contests while Morris is starting when Dawson Knox is out is pretty revealing to me. I think we've learned enough from McDermott and how he handles the preseason that the fact that Sternberger's playing in the fourth quarter, playing late in the second half of these games probably means it's an uphill battle for him to make the roster. I do have Sternberger on the practice squad for my practice squad. And I even think a guy like Wilson could be a practice squad guy too. Just you think about his original deal this offseason, not with the Bills, but before he was let go for his physical, he had one of the higher guaranteed salaries coming out as a UDFA. So he was a valued tight end prospect among the UDFA group. So Wilson could be a guy that potentially could hang on as a developmental guy. And at the end of the day, if Morris isn't on the team, I'm not going to be, like I said, upset. But I do think the Bills coaching staff has shown that they still do value him based on where he's playing in these preseason games and based on how much he does typically contribute on special teams.
That makes a lot of sense, Mike. I'm with you. I do think that the path is more likely. I'm using a placeholder tight end spot. I do think they'll want someone there, but if they get into a roster crunch in a position where they don't know if they need to go lean here, I think that they still could and use Gilliam where necessary and call up. They have these 2 call-ups, so they're not going to be overly concerned probably with anyone from this unit getting claimed. I also have Wilson. He had a $90,000 UDFA contract and 12 touchdowns in college. He was definitely, you're right, he was more decorated than people think. And guess where he played, Mike? Where do you think he played?
CMU, baby. The MAC.
A third MAC tight end in the room. Interesting. Starts to become a trend after a few players. There's something they like out of tight ends out of this conference. Maybe they receive particularly well.
Antonio Gates, another tight end from the MAC. Might not play tight end in college, but
yeah, I mean, he was pretty good. 82 catches for 874 yards and 12 touchdowns across 4 seasons. He's shown to be a pretty decent developmental. I liked what I saw on a play from him last game. And then the 2 catches for 44 yards from Sternberger. He shows he's got some rack. The Bills have been looking for rack, but they also want that rack with somebody that can block. I'm putting Sternberger on the roster. They love the XFL and USFL. They continue to sign players from those spring leagues, and they continuing to do it still as we speak, bringing in a linebacker from the USFL. So I don't think that they take for granted those spring conferences very much. So I'm putting Sternberger on the roster for now. We'll see what develops. I certainly don't think Morris is a lock, but I would not be shocked by both Sternberger and Morris going to the practice squad and or one with Joel Wilson. But for now, I have Morris and Wilson on my practice squad, as I think that's a good way to do it, Mike. All right. Really still only one main difference so far. Neither of us seem too crazy. I think Mike saw the light with Morris over the last couple of games. He was approaching roster status, admittedly, on my end. And then I was just reminded of it in the preseason games. I was reminded that he can receive. He was a converted receiver, Bowling Green. And it's the shortcomings with blocking. Now the redundancy with Kincaid. How long will he stay on the roster, even if he makes the original 53, will be something I'm keeping my eye on anyways. So to the O-line unit to wrap up offense, as we get halfway through the show here, Mike, we appreciate everybody tuning in. Please smash the like button here. We'll see if Mike and I have any differences. It got a little bit more interesting after a couple of these tackle injuries. I think it kind of cleaned some stuff up. There's really only like a battle or two left here going on. But Mike, I'm going to bounce it over to you. How many offensive linemen and which ones are you keeping and which ones are you hoping make it through to the Bills 16-man practice squad?
Yeah, so I have 9. For a second, I was thinking, should I have 10? And then I ultimately decided against that, just due to the players that were remaining at that point in time. This is one where if you would have asked me this 2 weeks ago, there would have been a much different answer prior to the preseason games. Obviously, horrible news with Tommy Doyle over the weekend. He's going to miss another season. So that's just awful news for him. But even the shell news of him retiring, you figured that maybe he realized he didn't have a shot at the starting position, or that maybe even the depth players behind him were coming for his job. Well, now 2 guys that you figured were going to be part of the mix, or at least fighting for a final spot on the line, are out of the equation now, which really opens things up. We'll start with the starters. Pretty simple here. Dion, McGovern, Mitch Morse, Osiris Torrance, Spencer Brown. They're all locks. That's going to be your starting line left to right. Then I'll go from there. Ryan Bates, he's obviously going to be your primary backup at the guard spots and at center. David Edwards, he can fill in at either guard spot. So he's probably your 7th man on the line. After there, I have Ryan Van Denmark and David Quesenberry wrapping it up. I know Quesenberry was falling down the depth chart heading into training camp, but after you have 2 tackles basically taken out of the equation in training camp, it opens up a spot for him where they're going to value his veteran presence, and he's going to make this team. And Ryan Van Denmark has been impressing so far during training camp. Not a name that I was really aware of heading into the summer, but by all accounts, he's played his way into this roster bubble scenario. And with some of the guys gone from the competition, I think he has a good chance of making this team right now. Now, there's 2 players I was thinking about that I ultimately decided to cut in this scenario. Number 1 is Alec Anderson. It may be a name not too familiar with most Bills fans, but he can be a backup center or guard from UCLA, was on the Bills practice squad last year. Bills were really high on him in his development last year in camp, and they actually, I believe, activated him to the 53 for one of the games late in the season. Didn't play, wasn't part of the game day roster, but normally a sign that they liked what they were seeing from him throughout the season. I think Anderson has a chance to possibly be on this roster in the future if he continues moving in the right direction. And then your favorite guy, Kev, you're going to love that I even mentioned him. Richard Garage. I don't think he's roster material at this time, but by most reports, he's had a solid training camp, and I think he's pretty much a lock at this point for the practice squad, unless someone claims him. So I would say Alec Anderson and Richard Garage would be the lower end guys that will be practice squad locks going forward.
So very similar. I think we even have the same 8 to start with. So there's not too much to talk about the starters. I think Edwards and Bates are really solid. The interior O-line has played well all preseason. It's overdrawn, this offensive line discussion, because we saw a couple of weird, sloppy quarter-1 plays with officials getting them in 3rd and 29s and 2nd and 25s and situations in one quarter of football. You put on Spencer Brown's film and he looked all right throughout much of that game. They were practicing on different things throughout the game. It's not always like a cohesive, we're going to chip block against one of the best defensive ends in the league in TJ Watt. And when you saw with Alex Highsmith as well. So I don't know how bad the offensive line has played. It was 8th best pass blocking per PFF in the preseason a week 2. So, I mean, I think we're getting a little bit crazy with this, like trying to manifest Spencer Brown being bad. I don't think that that's fully transparent and fully true. McDermott himself has mentioned the solid play, the young tackles, and mentioned Quisenberry and the 2 young guys who you've mentioned, Vandemark and Garage would be the 2 tackles that I do believe would qualify for this. But we have the same 7. I really think that the Bates and Edwards additions are solid depth. They've both been good. They both add if someone needs to come in. Ryan Vandemark's played his way onto this roster between Shell and the unfortunate Doyle incident. He has played his way onto this roster. There's no doubt about it. And then the bigger decision is, do they go with the veteran in Quisenberry, who is actually the one that got beat pretty bad on the Barkley fumble, or do they go with a young upstart in Richard Garage? And I'm going Richard Garage. I've preached his praise all offseason. It would be disingenuous to not put him on my roster. I do think he's done enough, and what helped him were the 2 people in front of him, one IR and 1 retirement. I think that he's right there, as you mentioned, for the roster. I don't think you need to expose him to waivers. Not that you're overly worried, but I think that having him develop there means you don't necessarily need to have a tackle on the practice squad either, because you have him and Vandy both on the roster behind your starters. And, does Vandemark win that job? Do you need a vet on the practice squad? I'm going to put Quisenberry as a vet practice squad member on my practice squad right now just to have him. I don't think there's any reason to worry about him. At this stage and he just hadn't played. He doesn't play very good. So I think him and Ike Butker will be 2 guys that they try to stash to their practice squad. It could potentially see a trade out of this unit as well. But Mike and I only have 2 differences on the offense. He has Quisenberry and Morris. I have Sternberger and Garage. Sternberger / potential UDFA / neither of them. I think would be an interesting way to put that tight end room, Mike. So how are you feeling about that tight end? Or excuse me, about that offense? We got Allen, Cook, Harris, Murray. We have Diggs, Davis, Sherfield, Shakir, Hardy, Shorter, Knox, Kincaid, Gilliam, Sternberger / Morris, Dawkins, McGovern, Morris, Torrance, Brown, Edwards, Bates, Vandemark, and Quisenberry / Garage. How are you feeling about the Bills offense?
I love it, man. I like this offensive unit that I picked for the Bills in 2023. The offensive line is not going to be as bad as what most fans are talking about right now.
Especially interior.
The whole discussion the past few days is that they're trash once again, that we need to panic, that we need to be concerned. I'm just not there. I am concerned about Spencer Brown. I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm not 100% confident in him going forward. But I will acknowledge going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers D-line is a tough challenge for almost any tackle in this league. So it's not like he had an easy assignment on Saturday. But if you go left to right, I always confident in Deion Dawkins. I know some people have been pointing out that he struggled against Pittsburgh and that he looks out of shape. I quite frankly don't think that's 100% fair to him. Deion Dawkins has at times not had the best preseasons. He's been called out a couple times in previous preseasons by the fan base. And when he performs in the regular season, he's an above average left tackle almost every year. So I'm confident once the season starts, we're going to get solid performances from Deion once again. Connor McGovern is solid at left guard. He's one of the better pass protecting left guards in the game. Mitch Morse, you know what you're going to get from him as long as he's healthy. If he does go down with an injury, you know Ryan Bates is a solid backup at the center position. Osiris Torrance has been probably the story of the preseason outside of Dalton Kincaid. The fact that he has really stepped up in his reps at right guard, to the fact that he's basically ended this competition in mid-August, which is a shocker to, I think, most fans, that he's going to end up winning this right guard spot so convincingly. And then Brown, we'll see. I know Saturday was not pretty, but during the regular season, when they're game planning, when they are preparing for opponents, it's going to be a much different story. You can give him help. You can find ways to reduce the liability that some fans think he will be. I think at the end of the day, this is going to be an average offensive line. I think the addition of Kincaid will make the weapons strong, and I like what the run game will provide in the red zone now that they have guys like Damian Harrison, Latavius Murray to finish things inside the 20. So I think this is a top 5 offense once again, with the potential of being even better inside the 20 in the red zone.
Okay, there you have it. Now we're going to time to get into the defense. That is our offense. Mike and I both have 24, so that means we have 26 defensive players coming at you just out of raw math. So we'll see if Mike and I have many differences here as we dive into the defensive side of the ball. So that should be, that's a fun unit. I think that there's going to be much talked about there. Could there be any trades coming from that? I don't think it's crazy. Brandon Beane likes to acquire his compensation style picks this way with trades, especially with the 1,200 cuts coming. Could there be trade from the defensive unit? We'll have to find out coming from Mike and myself here shortly. But we appreciate our show sponsor, Underdog Fantasy, sponsored by Cover One. Get out there, match $100 of your first deposit. We run best ball leagues all the time. Super fun fantasy league. One of my favorite things to do is get into a best ball league. You don't have to set your lineup. You get into a league of your choice. You make your draft selection, which is everyone, let's be honest, the draft is the funnest part. So Underdog Fantasy will let you do best ball, which is one of my favorite things to do. And select your team, and the highest scoring players make your starting lineup. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code COVER1 to match $100 on your first deposit. Mike, defense time, defensive end time. We did have quote unquote Eric Washington again today. We talked about this last time Eric Washington spoke. I think it's for sure solidly the pseudo defensive coordinator by stature, by press conference.
The voice of the defense. When you have a coach speaking about the defense, it's going to be Eric Washington on the coordinator day whenever they have the press conferences and the media involved.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about it, like what will happen here. It does seem like he is an acting defensive coordinator, maybe with defensive rooms or in certain situations or press conferences. And it does seem to be as much. Now, he went up and talked about his D-line unit, Mike, and had some interesting things to say. Will that change Mike's roster projections? Said Cameron Klein's been really good. He also mentioned the strength of a guy that he really likes in Kingsley Jonathan. It's going to be really hard to keep Kingsley off the roster. Interesting comments to talk that way about fringe players who you're probably hoping to get through to your practice squad. Both of them are my 2 practice squad guys. But that made me think twice about. That's really interesting praise for guys, you're hoping the league doesn't claim. They both had really solid preseason. Cameron Klein really popped to me. And so did Kingsley Jonathan. Mike, let's hear your defensive end projections. What do you got and why?
So Washington didn't change my opinions on Kingsley Jonathan and Cameron Klein. I think both of those are guys that you're going to most likely get on your practice squad. Although it is fair to mention Kingsley Jonathan did get claimed last year. He was with the Bills in the summer and then was claimed off the roster. So Jonathan was a guy that other teams in the NFL have already shown interest in the past, but still came back to Buffalo when it was all said and done. Defensive end room, I find interesting because we're assuming that Von Miller is going to be on the PUP list to start the year. So that means we're going to have one more guy in this room than what we're probably going to see during the middle of the season. Once Von comes back, it's likely one of these guys is going to either be cut, released, or maybe even demoted to the practice squad, depending on the situation. So your locks at this point are obviously Greg Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, AJ Epineza. Those are your 3 locks. You know those are members of your team come September. I have Boogie Basham making it, and then Shaq Lawson rounding out my 5 in the defensive end room. I do believe if Von Miller was healthy and Von was part of the equation right now, that Shaq Lawson would not be on this roster at the beginning of the regular season, and that they would choose Boogie Basham over Shaq Lawson. The fact that Boogie was a 2nd-round pick, that they would still want to invest in his development, I think would give Basham an edge over Shaq. You also add to the fact that Boogie, I don't want to say he's had a great camp, but he's had some good moments in the preseason so far. the only way this would really go the other way, where Shaq could make the team over Boogie in a case where Von is in the equation, would be Boogie's a trade candidate, Shaq is not. So if you're going to have to cut one of them, Shaq is the guy that will get released. But you would most likely, if you wanted to get rid of Boogie, try to trade him first. You just can't cut a second rounder entering his third year in the league. I guess technically you could, but it'd be far too early for me to get to that point. But those are my 5 heading into cutdown day.
Yeah, and if you think he talked highly about Kingsley Jonathan, he talked higher of Boogie Basham. Quote, Boogie came to play the other day, period. So, I mean, that's lock. I mean, it is what it is. It's lock status. I think that they like what they have from him. So I agree with your 5, Mike, but I had Kingsley Jonathan making the roster. He's my 6th defensive end. I think that his talent's too good. They think this is a claim game. This is the claim game. This is where you might have to get lean on your roster when it comes to the rest of the field. I think he gets claimed. I think he's been good enough. There's been evidence of him getting claimed by the Bears last year. He's been good in preseason, and Eric Washington did sway me. Took my final roster spot that I had flex for all my position groups. Was I going to go with a 7th receiver? Was I going to go, where was I going to go? Heavy at linebacker? What was another DB? What was I going to do? Keep Alex Austin? I don't know. But I did choose to keep Kingsley Jonathan. I think they've spoken highly of him. He's a guy that just was called out by his coach for going to be hard to not make the roster. I would not be shocked by a Kingsley Jonathan roster spot here. He killed
it 2 straight preseasons for the Bills. Like, he killed it last year, and he's killed it this year. So he's definitely deserving of an opportunity. I know I put him on my practice squad because I just don't think they're going to keep 6. But that is a name to watch, and I like that you have him making the team because that is an under-the-radar player that I don't think enough Bills fans realize how talented he truly is.
Yeah, so I think then to kind of cap that room off, I do agree with the rest of your selections. Things might have gotten difficult for a couple players with Von Miller. I think he sits the 4 weeks. I think he'll be back sooner rather than later. What do they do? Do they go to the roster with him in terms of IR? Do they want to have him on PUP? I don't think there's any financial differences between the lists. I'm not really sure which way the team will lean, if there's any benefits within the room for either list or the other. So he will be on a list. That thus benefiting Kingsley Jonathan. And then, like you said, Shaq Lawson has probably benefited from that scenario as well. With him on the list, I think more or less you can stash Kingsley Jonathan as well. So, Mike, defensive tackle time. Will we have any differences? Probably not, but we're going to bounce it to Mike. What do you got going on at D-tackle?
Yeah, I'm assuming that we're going to be on the same page with D-tackle. I have 5 making it. Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Poona Ford, Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle. I think those 5 are all solid locks at this point. They all are good contributors that you know what to really expect for the most part. I would be surprised if any of those 5 get released at this point. I know Jordan Phillips, there are some questions heading into camp. Could he be a surprise cut? I don't think so at this point. I think they're going to ride it out with experienced guys that they know they can trust. I know there was some backups on the D-line that have had some moments during the summer in August in preseason games, but I just don't think any of them have done enough to surpass those 5. And I just can't see keeping a 6 with some of these tough decisions at the back end of the roster.
Yeah, I mean, will they make a move? Like I said, will they need to make a room for Kingsley Jonathan or even Cameron Klein by letting someone like Phillips go? It's not crazy. He hasn't played an entire preseason pretty much. He's been coming back. He seems to be always hurt. There is some reprieve financially in getting out of that deal. What will happen? I have him on my roster. I have the exact same 5 on my roster. I do think it is considered in the room, or if they need to keep a younger player like Kingsley Jonathan and still want to go heavy at tight end and heavy at linebacker, they may need to cut from the D-tackle room as well, especially with the emergence of Ford and Settle, who have both been good. Will that push Phillips off the roster? For now, I say no, but they're going to have a discussion within the front office room next weekend after the preseason game, what they want to do with Jordan Phillips. I don't think it's a stone cold lock, but I do have him on my roster as someone that's able to get it done in this league. The injuries hurt him, but he does save the team, $1.6 million of working capital. Just for reference, Kingsley Jonathan. So by making a swap like that. So it is something to consider for the Bills if they need to make a roster spot for Kingsley Jonathan, who I do think they want a roster on this team, as well as keeping a cheap. Don't forget the contract styles of these players, Mike, when it comes to like a Richard Garage and a Ryan Vandemark and maybe even another tight end, a UDFA tight end, Joel Wilson. I'm not saying Joel Wilson's going to make the team, but that style of decision when it comes to some of these projections, including does that make sense? Cameron Klein, $870K himself. Does it make sense there, or does it make sense to carry the heavier Jordan Phillips on the roster? Is a decision they're going to make. I have Phillips making the roster right now because I'm going to get lean in my back seven here as we make our picks. But I don't think it's crazy that you see him as the one surprise cut or trade here from one. I think there's a trade from this unit somewhere on the front seven, Mike. So that is what I will say. I do think that if McDermott gets Swifty, I think he trades from this unit as we head to linebacker. So let's see what you have to say about the linebacker room, Mike. It's going to be an interesting one. Do you go deep? Do you go shallow? How many and why?
Yeah, so right now I have 6 linebackers making this team, but it might not be the 6 that everybody thinks going in. So I'll just get started, and if I don't say a name that you expect, just stop me and we'll talk about it. So I have Matt Milano, then Terrell Bernard, A.J. Klein, Dorian Williams, Tyler Matakevich, and Balin Spector.
Okay.
Which means I have Dodson getting cut. Now, would that be crazy to cut Dodson after he has essentially been your starting middle linebacker heading into late August? Would it be crazy? I think normally, yes, it would be. But Dodson has been horrendous. He does not have an expensive deal. He is not good in coverage. The main reason he was brought back was because he had experience with the system to be a guy that you hoped maybe could step up and be a placeholder. He has not shown the ability to do that. The fact that he is getting in these fights in practice, the fact that he has been hot-headed during practice, I think shows that this competition is starting to mentally wear on him. I don't think his head is in the right place. And on Saturday, he was just dreadful. He was not good. His misplay led to the early touchdown run, and he ended up still being on the field in the fourth quarter. And as we saw last year when O.J. Howard was playing in the fourth quarter, that's probably not a good sign if you're someone that Bills fans and Bills coaching staff and management probably assumed was going to be a key contributor to your roster when you're still playing with the third and fourth teamers. So I think Dodson is potentially playing for his roster life at this point. I said going into training camp that I wouldn't be surprised if he was cut. I remember some people thought that was crazy at this point, but I truly believe if Bernard was healthy in playing in the preseason at this moment in time, that Dodson would firmly be considered a cut candidate by the majority of fans. I believe this is Terrell Bernard's job once he is healthy enough to take over and return to the field. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be A.J. Klein's job early in the season due to Bernard's injury and the lack of preseason reps and not wanting to rush him into game action. But once Bernard is ready, I think they pass the torch to him, and there's just no reason to keep Dodson at that point when he could potentially be your third linebacker. And I'll just say a couple quick things. Obviously, we know Milano's a stud. Matakevich, you're keeping him for special teams reasons. And Balin Spector, I just don't think they're ready to cut him or move on from him yet. The reason why they even gave him a chance the third day of training camp with the ones is because they've seen enough from him during practice this offseason that they do think he has something more that he can bring to the table. Being a former draft pick, I think they want to continue to develop and see what they can turn that into.
I was close. You stole my thunder with the cutting of Dodson. So I do also have Terrell Dodson cut. I don't think he's very good. He struggles against heavily in zone coverage. Milano had to make up for it in the touchdown. He could not get off his block against the run, made one run stop late in the game. That's all I saw from him. I'm cutting Dodson. The only problem I'm having, Mike, is the $2 million deal, all guaranteed. Will the Bills find a trade suitor for him? Because that would be what they're looking to do. They're trying to see if they can trade player for player with someone that, that's weak at middle linebacker, that he might fit their scheme a little bit better in return for a potential right tackle, then might be pushing Richard Garage to the practice squad. Something along those lines. I don't think it's crazy. The contract, I got to stay consistent to my contract discussions that I've had pretty much throughout the show when you're making these decisions, and I will continue to in the DB room next. But I don't have him making the roster. I'm trying to trade him with all my might, though, because he's guaranteed $2 million this season. So it's expensive. It's value if he's going to get good play out of him. We didn't see it all offseason. I think Terrell Bernard starts day one.
And I do want to say one quick thing about the middle linebacker room, too. I know we were talking earlier about Spencer Brown at right tackle, and now we're talking about Dodson at middle linebacker. The two biggest complaints on this Bills roster are middle linebacker and right tackle. Those are the positions where fans are questioning why didn't you do anything this offseason? I think right tackle was going to be difficult to replace because they would have had to spend a decent chunk of money in free agency to actually get an upgrade. Your other route is drafting someone, and all the guys that they probably would have wanted were already taken. And Anton, the tackle out of Oklahoma, would have been taken by the Jacksonville Jaguars had they not traded back and basically needed to be assured by the Bills that we weren't taking him. So, but middle linebacker was a spot where I feel that if the Bills really wanted to, they could have gotten more insurance this offseason. There were middle linebackers to be had on cheap enough deals that could have come in and started right away on this Bills team. What that tells me is that the Bills truly did believe that Bernard or Dodson could get them through a year. Because there was guys like Levante David and Bobby Wagner that did not get crazy money that were available. But you got to think from the Bills' point of view. The Bills don't want thumpers at middle linebacker anymore. This is a passing league. So what I've been trying to tell people is it's not a surprise to me that in the last 2 years, they've drafted Terrell Bernard, Balin Spector, and Dorian Williams. The Bills are revealing their cards. They're basically saying, we don't want the prototypical middle linebackers that existed 20 years ago that are plugging the hole, that are making tackles in the backfield. We want guys that can cover, that can keep up with the athletic tight ends, that can keep up with running backs. That's why they're looking at a Terrell Bernard. And while Bernard might not be what most fans think of as a middle linebacker, that's what the Bills are wanting to see this year, to see if he can be that guy. So it's really unfortunate that we have been robbed of a preseason viewing him, because I truly believe behind one Bills drive, they're more confident in what Terrell Bernard can do than what the entire fan base is. We have looked at it because we haven't seen him in person. We just assume that he's going to fail when he gets his opportunity. And I don't think the coaching staff feels that way. And then you add the Dorian Williams pick. I think they're basically taking a 50-50 bet. If Bernard doesn't work out, well, then we have a guy like Williams that could work out. So basically to end the middle linebacker conversation, I'm not saying they're in a good spot, but I don't think the team believes they're in as bad of a spot as what maybe the outside looking in thinks at the moment.
Got like 6 minutes from Mike on linebacker there. That was that was fairly impressive linebacker discussion. I have 5. They need to go lean. Why are you going to go heavy at a position group that's not very good? I have Spector being cut and going to the practice squad. I don't think he gets claimed across the league. He conspicuously didn't stop receiving reps. AJ Klein took the job over him. I thought it was a pretty 1-for-1. Can he beat out Klein? And he couldn't. And I'm a Spector fan, and I'm not really high on Klein, but I think Klein is the contingency plan for Bernard. And I think Dorian Williams has played so well this preseason that he's going to, Washington couldn't answer to what position he's going to play. That's a good sign, not a bad sign. That means that they're going to probably give the middle linebacker reps, or they would have said, no, our plan is to stay the course, have him be the backup to Milano, and we'll see him in certain packages or here and there when needed. But I don't think that door is closed. So I think when you factor in Bernard, Williams, and Klein, and then you have depth in Matakevich in a pinch for special teams, I think you go 5 here. I don't think you only play 2, and then you have Rapp in dime situations and in big nickel and in big dime. He is 5.5, as we'd like to say, 11.5 personnel on offense. I think you see the same here. He is essentially a pseudo linebacker, and so is Taron Johnson. So it's pretty straightforward. I think you keep 5. You need to go lean somewhere, and that's where I have Kingsley Jonathan making the team. You have, Spector, and maybe it's actually Phillips that doesn't make the team, and both of those do. So we'll have to see exactly where the Bills play and what can they do with this $2 million Dodson contract. That is sticking out like a sore thumb. It's not a huge deal. They cut Howard, but they'd like to not have to eat that because you have to cut him and still roster, in this case, AJ Klein. You're still going to have to pay him about $1 million. So it's not ideal to have his replacement. But someone like Spector, who's probably on an $800,000 deal, that softens it a little bit, but it's still pretty expensive to have to look at. Mike, we're going to corner now as we look through the corner room. Fun room, not much debate, I don't believe. It just depends how many you're going to keep and whom, but I don't believe there's a battle, obviously, at corner 2, kind of, but there's not really much roster battle. So what are how many corners and who?
So I have 6 corners making it right now. Tredavious, Dane Jackson as the 2, Taron Johnson as your slot corner, followed by Christian Benford, Kyer Elam, and Siran Neal. I was thinking about keeping Cam Lewis, whatever you want to categorize him as a backup safety, corner, whatever. Yep. I think Cam Lewis has played well enough this camp to deserve a roster spot. But when I'm looking at all these guys on this team, I couldn't give him the final spot. As much as I wanted him being a UB product who has had his moments on the Bills, I couldn't find a spot for Cam Lewis. Wow. And then Alex Austin, I see him getting cut, going to the practice squad. I don't know if Cam Lewis is a guy that they would be able to get to the practice squad or if somebody else would claim him. But those would be my 6 corners going into the regular season.
Okay. Interesting enough. I do think they consider Cam Lewis. What's funny and interesting is I can't get this out of my head, Mike. They love Cam Lewis. I can't get out of my head that they tried him over certain safeties last year. That's how much they liked him. They like him on special teams. They sat Taron Johnson in a preseason game because they were worried about depth at nickel. If you were worried about him making the roster, in my opinion, I think it's a struggle to me to see why you don't have Cam Lewis on the roster. I have Cam Lewis on this roster. I think that he takes Neal's spot to the same reasons that the reasons I've been using for most of my roster projections, and I think I'm going to hit on some of them. Money. Siran Neal, you save $2.3 million by releasing. You're going to need to save some money to get Dodson off the roster if that's the way you decide to go. I do think they go younger. We've seen that Neal can't play at all. He cannot play defense. At some point, at that dollar, he is a good special teamer, but at that dollar amount, you need to move on. You need to make sure that you have a younger player that's cheaper. I have the same unit as you do exactly across the board, but my last spot's going to Cam Lewis over Siran Neal. And that's why they've been giving so many special team spots to other gunners, Justin Shorter, Cam Lewis himself. You've mentioned Andy Isabella and his reps. So I do believe that they're trying to replace him on special teams in a dying special teams era. So we're going to see if they really value special teams at $3.3 million or if they're going to go with Cam Lewis, who they think is a good special teamer himself and can maybe play defense a little bit better, as he is the backup nickel per their depth chart and per Sean McDermott.
Kevin, ideally, I would do the same exact thing you're doing here. The question is, what are the Bills going to do? So personally, I'm keeping Neal because that's what I think the Bills are going to do. I think at the end of the day, they're going to prioritize his special teams contributions because it's not like he has changed over the years. Basically, the Siran Neal that we see now is the guy that we saw a few years ago, and they've continually used a roster spot on him. So it would require a change by the Bills and their philosophy of building a roster for this to happen. Now, Cam Lewis might be the guy that's good enough to make them address this and make a change, because they do love Cam Lewis as a fill-in at a lot of these other positions. They know what they're going to get from him defensively. So I would love to see it. I hope that Cam Lewis makes this team. We'll just have to see how it eventually plays out.
Yeah, interesting enough there. Safety, don't think there's any, I don't think there will be any debate. We each have 4 spots left on our roster. I went light at linebacker. Mike added the extra linebacker. I added the extra upstart defensive end. 26 defensive players each, 24 offensive players each on our roster, 3 specialists, where there's no debate on the specialist positions. What are your safeties, Mike? I don't think you have any.
Yeah, I think we're pretty safe on this. No one's sneaking in Dean Marlowe over the other 4 that we have. So it's going to be Micah, Jordan, Taylor, and DeMar Hamlin rounding it out. And I know there was talk about DeMar Hamlin back in minicamp, that would he be part of this team? Would he actually be playing football this year? Well, I think we saw during the preseason, not only is he going to be playing football in 2023, but he actually can still contribute at a decent level. He showed some flashes during these few games, and it looks like DeMar is 100% ready to go, albeit as a backup this year. But I was encouraged by what I saw from him the last 2 games.
Interesting enough. Yeah, there was, the first 3 are stone cold locks, 1, 2, 3. There was some debate over Hamlin. He came back and made sure to solidify the 4 to me. He was the number 2 safety last year and most of the season, now going back to his 4 role, adding great depth to the team. Struggles in coverage, just straight up. Good in run stop, good in run support. Torpedo, good special teamer. I like Hamlin. His contract's now guaranteed due to the situation. There's not much to be said there. I think he's as locky as a lot can be. I think it's bad press. It's bad PR. I think he's a good player. There's just so many reasons that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to move on from him at this point. And he's looked good. He has earned the 4th safety spot. I haven't seen much else behind him. I've seen a little bit from Zane Anderson on special teams, but not enough from anybody to push the issue. So I have the same 4. Finishing up my practice squad as well, though, I think Alex Austin from the unit we just talked about, we didn't bring him up. I think he goes right to the practice squad with Jamarcus Ingram, 2 guys they do like and want to continue to develop at the corner spot. So they'll be going to my practice squad as well. And I think they put Zane Anderson on the practice squad to round off their 16-man practice squad that I've gone over as well. So Mike and I agree on the safety position for each, the same 4. Almost the same DBs, but I have Lewis. He has Saran Neal. He has the ability to, Mike is picking who they think the coaching staff likes, but I also think they like Cam Lewis. So we'll see how that works out as they kind of make their roster selections. Our defenses are fairly similar. I have Kingsley Jonathan. He has Balin Spector. He has him on his practice squad. I have Balin Spector on my practice squad. So kind of just a few different changes there. And real quickly to go over my practice squad real quick, free agent quarterback or Matt Barkley. We'll see which way they go there. Mims, I do have it. I have Ty Johnson making the practice squad as a vet, Isabella as a vet, Shavers, Quentin Morris. I have Wilson, Anderson, Butker, Klein, Cameron Klein, that is, Balin Spector, Howard, Traven Howard, the linebacker, who I thought has shown enough to be on the practice squad there. Jamarcus Ingram is going to make the practice squad, in my opinion. They like him. Anderson, the safety, and Alex Austin making the practice squad, with my final spot being between trying to keep broker or not with some of those linemen that I had earlier. So that kind of sums up, and we have the same specialist. There isn't even a battle anywhere to be had. I don't think Sam Martin had his best day. I don't know if that was a deliberate outkick his coverage to see what special teams could do on that return. I thought that was a bad punt. A situation where Corey Bojorquez used to put the Bills in, where he outkicked his coverage and left them in bad situations. But I'm wondering if that was deliberate to see what your gunners could do. And Dorian Williams succeeded and no one else did on that specific rep. So I don't know if that was deliberate or not. If not, it was a horrible punt. If it was deliberate, I kind of get the theory there. Sam Martin hasn't had the best preseason, in my opinion, but that could be all situational based on what they're looking to see from the kicker punter unit. Obviously, Bass got his extension. He's locked, and Reed Ferguson is the guy in the parking lot if you need to send somebody to IR that you cut and then re-sign so you can send someone to IR. There's no so far. There's no candidates for that right now, Mike, that we know of. Outside of it, they want to put Vaughn on IR instead of PUP, and outside of an injury we don't really know how severe they are, like someone they want to stash like Greg Mans, or if Damian Harris is more injured than we think, something along those lines. So what do you think of the final roster that you have developed here, Mike? What are your final thoughts on whether it's special teams or return specialists, kick punt returner? Do you have Hardy winning both? Like, I guess sum it all up for us.
Yeah, I have Hardy obviously as the punt returner. I think it could be Hardy or Shakir as the kick returner. I really don't have a preference either way. If they do have Hardy as involved in the offense as what I think they could this year, I think maybe it would make sense to have Shakir be the starting kick returner, especially as he moves down the depth chart. Give him something to kind of contribute to this team if he's going to end up being as low on the depth chart as it looks like he might be at this point. But my main takeaways is this is the deepest Bills roster that we've seen during the Sean McDermott era, which means it's probably the deepest Bills team that we've seen since going back to the mid-'90s, early '90s, back when they were loaded on both sides of the ball. And it might sound crazy to say that, but they really did add depth throughout this roster this year. And the fact that we're talking about these bottom of the 53 battles, and we're still naming guys that have contributed and made solid plays and contributions to this team during the preseason, says that this is a really good team and a really good roster. Now, the one thing I'd be somewhat worried if I was a fan is, when is the decline ultimately going to start with some of the older players on this Bills squad? There's going to be questions about Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. When are they going to finally start going down in their careers? I don't think it's this year, but at some point they're going to regress. When Von Miller gets back, is he going to be 100%? When you're looking at some of the unknowns, right tackle, middle linebacker, what are they going to get out of those spots? But other than those questions, this is a solid roster throughout that I think should be expected to contend for an AFC East division title and hopefully make a run in the playoffs. It's obviously a much more difficult AFC this year, so nothing is guaranteed. But this is a team I expect to be competing for a Super Bowl at the end of the year with the likes of Kansas City and Cincinnati.
Well, there you have it. There's our roster. Our main differences being I have Sternberger / free agent. Mike has Quentin Morris. I have Garage. Mike has Quisenberry. So Mike's taking the field. Mike is taking chalk on his. Normally I get a random projection from Mike, but he's going chalk.
There's no Bobby Harts this year to the disappointment of everyone.
Yeah, no, Mike went chalk on his selections. Took the 1 seeds in the scenarios. We'll see if those play out for him there with Quentin Morris. Went Balin Spector. Obviously, that's still a draft pick, so I wouldn't call that I would consider that still a fairly decent chance Spector could see the roster. Also went with Phillips on Mike's roster. I went with Kingsley Jonathan making my roster instead of Spector. Really being our difference on defense. And I took Cam Lewis. Mike took the incumbent and chalk picking Sir Neal. So we'll see how it all plays out. But other than that, fairly similar rosters. And one position to still look out for, quarterback, backup quarterback, and the backup running back spots. I think both of those positions wouldn't be shocked to see an ad somewhere on this roster this specific season. And I don't go heavy at linebacker because we talk about how bad the unit is. I don't think there's a reason to stash Dodson, Matakevich, Klein, especially when you have Bernard and Williams as well. So I think they just go with one vet, Klein versus Dodson. And I don't think Spector did enough post OTAs to keep this job, as he did not see much time with the ones. I think they'll try to sneak him to the practice squad and hope to continue his development with Traven Howard there as the 2 practice squad linebackers. But Mike, what a great show. Put in a great hour and 15 minutes. Check out Underdog Sports as well for fantasy best ball. Promo code COVER1. And as always, please smash the like button to our show. And watch out for Cut Down Day. 1 week from today, we're doing a Cut Down Day show on Kevin Syracuse on newly producer Kevin Syracuse coming over from Buffalo Fanatics. We're excited to have him here and excited to have him on the show, replacing irreplaceable AJ Cebulski over there from AJ's Analysis on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network on Mondays. So we can't really forget any of that, Mike. So how are you feeling with everything going into cut down day trades? Does Brandon Beane do something for us to talk about next Tuesday on the cut down day show?
So I don't think anything is really going to happen before then. I am excited for the preseason contest against the Bears, just to see some of the backups, see how they perform, see if there's anybody that gives one last stand to try to make this roster and earn their way on. But ultimately, what I'm looking for is after cut down day. Is there a middle linebacker out there? Will there be a right tackle out there or a backup quarterback that makes sense to bring onto this roster? Ideally, you would love to add some depth at any of those three positions, but reality might not be so kind. The fact is, if a team is releasing a right tackle or someone that has started in the past, the reason they're getting cut is because they probably didn't perform during the summer, or maybe they're regressing or they don't have it anymore. So the options at tackle probably not going to be that strong. Personally, at middle linebacker, how much of a player do you have to be an upgrade over what they have at middle linebacker right now? I don't think you need to be incredible to be a potential upgrade. So I could see them being in the market as someone in the middle linebacker, a solid middle linebacker gets cut. But other than that, I'm not really expecting a lot going forward. If they got a new backup quarterback, fine. I don't think any of us have really been overly impressed by what we've seen behind Josh. And then, like you said, tight end, if they want to bring in a blocking tight end, a cheap contract to be a quality third tight end on this roster, I'm okay with that as well. But I don't expect any season-defining moves in the final few weeks before the season starts. Definitely nothing like Lawyer Malloy to the Bills back in the day from New England and then starting a few days later. So I think it's going to be a relatively quiet, uneventful period, but who knows?
It's going to be very interesting going forward. Just do not get over exaggerated from the poor play of the offensive line. There's been good moments. The interior is much better. It's the Chiefs model of protecting Josh Allen up front, just like they do Patrick Mahomes. It's the model of if he can't have pressure in his face, he can make things happen, especially where Deion Dawkins is good throughout the majority of the season. And that's nothing to worry about. So I do believe that even with good interior O-line play, which I'm pretty excited about, I do believe with that, Josh can make anything happen. He's a $45 million quarterback. You can't have a $45 million player and a $30 million right tackle and a $20 million left tackle. He needs to make up for any deficiencies on the roster. You can't have first-round picks at every single spot across the roster and or pick a player in the draft that you think it should have been picked over Terrell Bernard. I think Terrell Bernard starts, and I think Dorian Williams was also a good pick. So they needed that linebacker depth. It was horrible on this roster. And I think that you see Bernard or Dorian Williams take charge of this defense. And I think the Bills know what they're doing at the middle linebacker position, especially next to Matt Milano and with the emergence of Taylor Rapp as well, to kind of ease some of the sub packaging away from that player. So there's a lot to really dissect there, as Rapp is to me my sixth linebacker that I didn't keep on my roster. But fairly same rosters. Tune into the Cut Down Day show next week. We have the size coverage coming up with Ant. We have, Cover One Buffalo tomorrow. We have Buffalo Late Night with Thomas. So we have the Greg Thompson Sports Show on Friday. And then we have Under Review with Joe DeRosa on Saturday. And then Monday as well with my guy, David Foxy, and his new co-host, Uber. So we're looking forward to the next week of shows and then leading right into our Cut Down Day show next Tuesday. But as always, from the Going Deep podcast, I'm Kevin, that's Mike, and we'll catch you here Tuesday at 7 to go over the cuts, go over the final roster, see who got more picks right, and talk about potential claims and roster additions and moves around the league as well. So we look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday right here live on YouTube.